from One Woman, and I'm here with the amazing Francine Tone. She's tuning in from Hawaii today. How are you today, Francine?
I'm doing great.
yeah, awesome. So I've had the pleasure of meeting Francine at our Phoenix event last year. She was one of our amazing speakers, and she's jumped on board to be a part of our speakers bureau. And we know we have the best female empowerment speakers in the world, women with such amazing and diverse backgrounds. And Francine, you have an amazing background. Let's talk about that, because you've been a lawyer for over 30 years, but you've got all kinds of things that you're interested in, including surfing and an extraordinary life and travel. And so tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
Okay, well, actually, my life didn't start out so good, but I will say today, I feel like I'm one of the luckiest girls in the world. But in the beginning, my life was actually one of the unluckiest girls in the world. My mother died when I was 1. My father abandoned me, left me with my Japanese grandmother in Japan. And then I was adopted at 5. Of course, I did not know any of this until one hot, humid afternoon in Japan. My 3 friends were running around circles around me and chanting, "Your mother is dead, your mother is dead, your mother is dead." It's a horrible way to find out the truth of your background. And I ran home crying, and my parents sat me down and told me, yes, my mother was dead. But they made me feel good that I was chosen. They chose me to adopt me. But it wasn't long after that that my father came into my room and started touching me in ways I didn't understand as a 5-year-old. But one of the things that saved me is that even though I was only 5 years old, what I learned very quickly was when that wasn't happening, it was at night, and I was outside playing, I had control over all the things that I did. And even at 5, I knew that when it was my time, I was in control. And that really has been the foundation of everything I've ever done. Because, let's face it, things happen to people. And my story is not unique in the sense that there are people with worse backgrounds than me, some not as bad, but people have things that happened in their lives. I had a friend one time, her mother used to tell her she was fat when she was 10, 11, 12 years old. And she will sit and cry and say that she had the worst childhood ever. But that's how she feels. But it's the ability to say, yeah, there were things that happened to or around me, but I don't have to be a victim of that. I can create my own destination, my own future. And so during the daytime, when I was out playing, I got really good at the monkey bars. And I decided that I was going to be better than the boys, and I was. And since then, I've kind of always looked for the monkey bars. What's the monkey bars? What's the monkey bars? And then the next thing that happened to me was I came to the United States when I was 8, and I began watching the Perry Mason show. And Perry Mason, every week, somebody accused of murder would come to him and go, "Oh, you're the only one I can trust. You're the only one I can turn to." And I'm at 8, I have no one to trust, no one to turn to. Because it turns out my adopted mother was suffering from all the symptoms of a battered woman syndrome, which I didn't know till much later in life. So she was not helpful in my situation. So I watched Perry Mason, and he became my mentor. That was my idol. And after a while, I decided I was going to grow up to be Perry Mason. And that's how I ended up becoming a lawyer. And my becoming a lawyer and doing it was, I didn't want other people to go through life without having anyone to trust, because it's kind of crummy not having anyone you can turn to. So I became that lawyer for my clients, and I've been doing it for over 30 years. I love being a lawyer, and I love connecting with my clients. And I do criminal defense work at the appellate level. So I have clients who are in prison. And this is a testament, I think, to the kind of communication I have with my clients. Is I get prisoners who I've had, no matter what I do, I can't change their sentence. They're going to serve the whole sentence. I didn't get anything for them despite filing an appeal. And they write me a thank you letter for having listened to them and for having been their attorney, for advocating for them and doing the best that I could. And then I get letters from prisoners I don't even know who say, "I'm told I want you to hire, I want to hire you." And I can't take those cases, but I get those letters from prison, and I've done nothing of benefit for them other than listen to them, communicate with them well, and let them know that I heard them and that I'm doing the best I can. And those are my toughest clients. And other clients are a little bit easier, but it's the same kind of work that I do with them, and it's all because of Perry Mason.
Wow. Wow. That is such an amazing story. And I think just what you do is so beautiful, because I think that all of us just want to feel validated in terms of, do you see me? Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Is what I'm saying important? And that's I think why you get so many letters, is just the fact that you see people and you hear people. And that's, I think, more than anything else, maybe even walking free or whatever the case is that, people just want to feel like a human being, and that they're respected, and that somebody's listening to them and paying attention to what they have to say. So yeah, wow, crazy. And yeah, just what you turned that into, from a little girl and just watching Perry Mason and knowing that that's exactly what you wanted to do. And I think that, I just remember from your talk, is you get caught up as a lawyer and you get into the busy and the hustle and bustle and all that kind of things, is that life can change pretty quickly, and that
Oh, yeah.
you can be forced into something that you just didn't even see happening, and how that changes life and puts life into perspective pretty quickly. So tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, yeah. So I've been a lawyer for a long time, and I have one son. He was my baby from my first marriage, and he's definitely the apple of my eye, my little baby. Well, by now he's 24 years old. He's grown up. He's an Air Force pilot, and he goes to New Zealand for his dream vacation, 3 weeks with an Olympic coach for skiing bumps, moguls. And I'm sitting on my porch, and the phone rings, and I don't normally answer my home phone. And I said to my husband, something told me, we need to answer this call. And it was a call from New Zealand. It was that call that no mother ever wants to get. There's been an accident. And she couldn't tell me if he was dead or alive. And I got to New Zealand as fast as I could. And then when I got there, they told me that my son had suffered a severe traumatic brain injury. He had a freak fall at the ski resort and slid down 60 meters, and his head hit an ice berm. Didn't have his helmet on. Not sure that would have made a difference, but and they told me he would be a vegetable for the rest of his life. So at that moment, I called my husband and I said, I don't know how long I'm going to be in New Zealand, because the Air Force would bring him back to the U.S. when he was stabilized, assuming that ever happened. And at that time, the doctors kept telling me, you need to really start preparing your home and your mindset and your life for your son to be living at home as a vegetable for the rest of his life. And I just operated like, that's not going to happen. And one doctor even got mad at me, took me in to see the CAT scans and tell me, how horrible these were and all that. And I finally turned to the doctors and I said, I'm at the beginning of this journey. Now is not time to give up. And it was kind of like I had to find the monkey bars in that situation, right? Because everything's about monkey bars for me. And the monkey bar for that was that at that moment, lots of studies were coming out about the brain. And my husband was reading everything while I was in New Zealand and he was in California, reading. And every day I would talk to him on the phone, and I was learning a lot about the new studies. And the monkey bar was nobody really knew much about the brain. Mm-hmm. And the new studies were showing that there were so many things that people believed about the brain that wasn't true. Because for up to that point, they thought 2 years was the max. Whatever recovery would happen in 2 years, that was going to be it. But the new studies were saying, showing that neuroplasticity, that you could retrain the brain, you could rewire the brain, all these things were available. So I think in a way I was lucky that it happened in New Zealand, because I tapped into homeopathic cures that didn't hurt him. A woman who offered her free services because she read about him in the newspaper, and her son was an RAF pilot in Britain. Wow. And came every day and did reflexology on his feet, which is the toes are connected to the brain.
Yes.
and Western medicine. I didn't care. We were looking for everything. As long as it didn't hurt him, I did it. And I think for the most part, though, I sat holding his hand, speaking to him.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew he was waking up, and the doctors didn't believe me, but he was. And when he got stabilized, we came back from New Zealand. He was put in a brain injury rehab unit. Now, when I left that night in Palo Alto, because like they wouldn't let me stay with him, I had to go home. He was still in that kind of semi-comatose state. When I returned the next morning, he was sitting upright in a wheelchair. And in my mind, I was like, not a vegetable, check. I got that, that's over. So now what's next? And it took us 10 years of hard work, but, and he wasn't living at home the whole 10 years. 8 months of outpatient rehab, and then my monitoring him once he was out. And at the end of 10 years, he had recovered completely. And I swear he's smarter than he was before, and his memory is better than ever. But he's fully recovered. And 2 years after that, he got his first real job after the accident as a strategic military planner for the U.S. Air Force in Europe and Africa.
Wow.
He did that for 6.5 years. And so, but that's the kind of life-changing event that can happen to anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And what do you do? What do you do when that happens? And you have to kind of get into the moment and deal with the crisis. But that was a big wake-up call for me. And that's when I realized that I was burning the candle at both ends at that point. You know, I was overworking myself, feeling like I had to do everything. And it was through that process and the things that I learned from my son Kevin as he was recovering and the things that he said that kind of started putting some light bulbs going off in my head and saying, you know, we need to create space in our life so that we can deal with things that do happen to us. And instead of being busy all the time. So now I'm a big advocate of this busyness. That needs to stop. We're killing ourselves thinking that we have to be busy all the time. And so it's kind of a system that I've developed is that it all has to do with the brain bandwidth, because all the brain stuff that I learned is that we fill our brains up with so many things that don't matter. Mm-hmm. And we get to the point where we don't even know what matters and what doesn't matter anymore. And then you wonder why you're in burnout or you're anxious, worried all the time. And it's almost like your brain is in that kind of rush hour traffic all the time. And there's no space. And one of the things that I do when I work with people is to help them find that space, clear out the traffic so they have that open freeway, so that there's space in the brain, so which means time and energy and freedom to deal with life, to go surfing like I do in Hawaii, or to deal with a child that has had a traumatic incident, to deal with just life generally that happens to all of us, and to be able to have some freedom.
Absolutely. And yeah, that's the thing, is that life can change in a heartbeat, and we get so caught up in stuff, and it almost becomes your normal, as opposed to what do you love to do? What's really important to you? If life changed in a heartbeat or a split second, for yourself or for your family or for somebody you love or your job or your business or whatever, that you're going to be okay, and what can you do, and how can you kind of plan your life so that it doesn't always feel like you're anxious and stressed out and burning the candle at both ends. And I think that's how most people operate. It becomes the normal, and almost what society has driven us to, in terms of expectations and work and everything connected to online devices, all that kind of stuff, emails that never end now. It's not a Monday to Friday 9 to 5, it's a 24/7, all the craziness. And that's what I love about what you do, Francine, is because you really help put things in perspective for everyone in terms of how to live a life that you love, and realize what's really important, and take time for that. And it's why you can be chatting with me from Hawaii right now. That
Right.
there is a balance. That you went surfing this morning.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know what it is that I went through this crisis and had to discover it. But I realized that you don't have to wait for the crisis to start shifting your life a little bit, shifting your mindset, shifting your priorities. And I work with attorneys. I'm an attorney, so I work with women attorneys as well. And I get the call like, I'm so burned out. I think I need to change my profession. And for an attorney, I always ask, let's see what you're doing before we change professions, because so much has been invested in becoming an attorney. And there are a lot of things lawyers can do besides practice law, but oftentimes when I ask them, what do you love about what you're doing? Just in life, do you love your marriage? Do you love your work? Do you love your clients? What is it? And almost all of them tell me they love the law that they are practicing. They love the law. They love that. But they're either overwhelmed in one way or the other from family or the office. They have too much to do. They have no time for themselves and all that. And once we kind of go through all that, I realize that they have actually dumped a lot of stuff on themselves that they should give to somebody else to do. And when we clear that out, it's amazing that they continue to practice law and they're able to start enjoying the time with their husbands or their children. They actually can make time, because it's almost an illusion that we've created for ourselves, like you say, that new normal, right? And lawyers tend to get stressed out because of the kind of work we do. And and that's kind of leads me to the things that I'm doing now is I do continuing education for lawyers, which has led me to teaching them more about stress management, which led me to emotional intelligence and being able to kind of get their minds to the place where they are better at connecting with people. Because I discovered that a lot of lawyers aren't really good at that. They're real smart and they're really good at the law, what they do, but connecting with people is sometimes difficult. And if you think about it this way, if you can't connect with yourself because your brain is so on fire with so many things, how do you expect to connect with anybody else? So it's the whole package.
Absolutely, yes. And I mean, you work with, individuals and groups to do this, but you also speak and work with the masses in terms of the education component and all that stuff. So where did your love of, speaking and educating come from, and how did you get into doing that? Because, that's really a big passion of yours, is just being able to share this with as many people as you can.
Yes. So after I became an attorney, I taught law school for a while. And I loved the teaching. I loved the sharing. I loved when people's light bulbs would go off and people would get things. It was really exciting for me. And then later, when I quit doing that, then I became a ski instructor. And I'm now a fully certified ski instructor. And I love the teaching and I love training new instructors. Every year, new instructors would come in. I became the lead trainer for the new instructors, teach them how to be a better teacher, a better skier, and all that. And I just loved it. And I realized I've been speaking my whole life and teaching people. And I decided, all the stuff that I've learned through my history, my son's trauma, and all the things I've learned about the brain is everything I do is based on the brain and all the new science that's coming down on the brain and how important emotional intelligence is. And people, when they learn about this and they take one thing and apply it to their life, it has a rippling effect. One little new drop and then it ripples out. And so that's how I started my speaking, was really just teaching. And I didn't think of it as speaking until much later when I realized I've been speaking in front of groups. I was the leader of the women's program. I would do orientation. I've been speaking in so many ways. And being a lawyer, I would speak in front of judges and in front of courts a lot. So I've just taken all the skills that I've developed over the years and just kind of packaged it up into my new business, because with lawyering, I still practice law, but my work is one-on-one with the client, just one person at a time.
Right.
Whereas speaking in public, I can reach more people at once. And that's what's exciting about speaking.
Yes, and just seeing that immediate impact. And I'm sure you see a lot of people have the light bulb moments or those aha moments, just sitting there going, oh yeah, oh, I totally do that, or I need to do that, or whatever. And it's rewarding when you can watch that or hear people after you speak in terms of just, what really resonated with them, and the change is instant. So let's talk about that a little bit, about in terms of the talks that you do and the workshops and things like that you offer. I know you do a lot of corporate things, and let's talk a little bit about emotional intelligence, because I think that's really big now, especially in the workplace, in terms of employees and just the health and well-being of employees, and also what that spills over into a corporation setting and what that means to businesses at the end of the day.
Right. So emotional intelligence is basically, a lot of people attribute the word to Daniel Goleman, who wrote the book Emotional Intelligence in the 80s, but actually it was coined by two other people in the 70s. But really, I always tell people, do you know how old emotional intelligence is? And they go, oh, it's from the 70s or 80s. And I go, no, it's older than dirt. The first premise of emotional intelligence is self-awareness. And it's becoming aware of what you're doing so that you can, when you have a thought and an emotional response to it, you see it. And then once you recognize it, you're able to learn to manage it. It's kind of like, if you don't know it's there, you can't manage it. And the Temple of Delphi, Apollo's temple in Greece, on it was know thyself. And so it's been around a long time. Lao Tzu, which is a Chinese philosopher, one of his quotes says, knowing others is wisdom, knowing yourself is enlightenment. So this is back, 500 BC. And then Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, all these guys were talking about really self-reflection and understanding and awareness of self. So the idea is not new. What's new, though, is our ability to assess a person's emotional intelligence. What is that? And it's basically, the components are understanding yourself, being able to manage your emotions, then as a result of that, being able to recognize and help manage other people's emotions. So that it allows a leader with high emotional intelligence to be able to speak to, connect with, and help their employees, engage them. And when there's a problem, they're able to recognize it and empathize. It even helps with decision making. It helps with interpersonal relationships. It just helps all the way across. So you could have a super high IQ, but if your emotional intelligence score is really low, relatively low, you can be really smart at solving specific, intricate problems. But the decision making part of should I go this route or that route is not as fine-tuned as it should be or could be. And so imagine a company and the leadership doesn't have a high emotional intelligence. Those companies, their employees are not engaged. In fact, there's about 70% of employees are not engaged.
I was going to say, I would say that that's a lot, most workplaces.
Yeah, and exactly, right? Most workplaces, 70% of employees are not engaged. What that tells you is they don't care about your company, they don't care about the work they're doing, they're probably not doing the work. And instead, they will stay 8.5 hours because the perception is if I'm at my desk, I'm a good employee. I'm perceived to be a good employee. Meanwhile, the employer is losing money.
Mm-hmm.
So if you improve the emotional intelligence of the leadership and then let it trickle down into the employees become more engaged because the leadership understands, watches, and engages with the employees. And that means you have less turnover. And we know what turnover is expensive. Every time you have to hire and retrain, right? It's very expensive. And emotional intelligence training has now, they've done it enough in big companies. The Air Force is using it for recruitment. You've got companies, Fortune 500 companies that are using it and have used it. American Express is using it. And they're seeing up to 250% ROI on emotional intelligence training, which no other training provides you that kind of ROI. It's amazing. And so I went and I studied a lot more about what the current emotional intelligence assessments, and became certified as an assessor so that I can give the EQI 2.0 or 360 assessments and then do the debrief. And then when you do the debrief, that's when you find out, well, what are the areas of weaknesses or things that are out of balance. And as you start working on it, kind of everything gets elevated. And it's really remarkable because almost after you get that first assessment, the debrief, your life changes.
Yeah.
And everything you touch changes.
Yeah. I can imagine it would be completely transformative for any business or company in terms of implementing it, and you'd have results like that.
Yes.
That's the thing, is that it's the awareness and understanding and the tools that you need to implement that can have results right away.
Yeah. And I always say start with your leadership, because your leadership is the one who isn't, the one that's bringing everybody along. And there are a lot of leadership styles, and we've all learned about those. Everybody's read about them. It's like, it doesn't matter what your style is. If you don't have a strong component of emotional intelligence, it doesn't matter what your style is. You won't notice when you've lost your employees, when they've got X's for eyes or their eyes glossed over. You won't notice it. And that's the kind of thing you need to be able to notice so that you can address that first. And if you can get your employees, and this is like really developing that human capital. And you mentioned earlier how all of us are on the internet or on phones and all this electronic stuff. We are slowly disengaging with each other through all this electronics.
Absolutely.
And working a company through an emotional intelligence assessment, the leadership, and getting that in is really bringing that human connection back. Because like I do some work with law offices, and lawyers in particular actually are scoring on average less than the average, because they've got the book smarts, they know how to do the legal work, they're really good at that, but law school doesn't prepare them for any of this real human connection. And I think that with artificial intelligence coming out at any business, and all the technology that's out there to do a lot of things that humans before had to do, and how easy it is to be remote, that there's one thing left, and that's the human connection. We've got to maintain that and make it better than ever.
Yeah, it's so funny how technology has made us so disconnected. So even though we have more means to connect, you don't have that human connection anymore. So now we're going back around again to really how do you teach people to be humanly connected again? And it goes back to the story of even working with the inmates that you said. People want to know, do you see me? Do you hear me? Is what I say important? Because when everything is done through just emails or whatever, and you just don't have that human connection and that understanding, those conversations and all that kind of stuff, everything starts to suffer. So
yeah, that is so true. And just to let you know, my prisoners that I represent, I never meet them. Exactly. And I never speak to them on the phone. All I do is write them letters, but I write to them as if I were speaking to them. And I get this response from them. And I speak to other attorneys who do the similar kind of work as me, and they go, I don't get those letters. Well, maybe you're not writing to them like they're human beings. Right. You're not validating their concerns. Even if they're wrong, validate that they thought of it. And then when you start dealing with people who aren't in prison because they've done something wrong, just people who aren't, and I see it all the time. You go to the store and how sometimes you hear a patron speak to the clerk. It's like, why are you being so rude to the clerk? They're here to help you. And just even little things like that. And just yesterday I was out surfing, and I observed an elderly gentleman who's a longtime surfer in the area, and a young man who just moved here about 1.5 years ago to be a surf instructor, and they got into it, and they were cussing at each other. I'm standing out there like waiting for a wave, and they're cussing at each other, and I'm thinking, if I just had 10 minutes with each of you, this would not happen.
Yeah.
and it's things like that that people get so worked up over things that don't matter, for
Yeah.
one, but not knowing what to do with that reaction. It becomes so they react and just throw their emotions out there. And I don't. Emotional intelligence is not about suppressing your emotions, because that has bad results too, because it can cause physical and physical things in your body to suppress. Suppressing isn't it. It's recognizing it, monitoring it, and managing it, because there are times when you want to express anger. There are times when you want to express disappointment or sadness. Yes, but the automatic uh, response is probably not the right one.
Right, right. And it's how to communicate that and how to, process that and to be able to communicate that, because I think that that's where a lot of people get into trouble as well. So you do a lot of great work in terms of emotional intelligence and do a lot of work with corporations and things like that, but you do all kinds of great talks like you did for us. So let's talk about some of the other talks that you offer and some of the groups and stuff that you've spoken for, so just people get an idea of all the things that you can do, because you have to do like the art of action and prolonging inspiration, and so talk a little bit about those.
Okay, yeah. So I like my prolonging inspiration talk, because this is the kind of talk I give to a group of people who usually go to events. And, and anybody who's ever been to an event that's been motivational or inspirational, you'll know what I'm talking about. You go to this event and you get so inspired, and it's like, oh, yes, I'm going to go change the world. And then you get home and there's a pile of laundry, and now you're going to make lunch the next morning, and you're in traffic the next day, and all that inspiration is just gone, right? So if you went to the event on Saturday and Monday afternoon, all that inspiration is gone. How do we keep it? How do we harness that and grow that inspiration? So in my talk, it's kind of a modified goal setting thing that I deliver in my talk. And everybody gets a little notebook out, and we write down the things that they're going to do. And they're going to identify one thing that really inspired them. And we create a plan right there and then for them to take home and read every day, and then to develop what they're going to do next from that plan, to remember what inspired them. Otherwise, gone. And I see this happen so many times.
So true. So true. Well, that's what I love about you, Francine, is that, well, you're one of the most brilliant and inspiring women that I've ever had the pleasure of meeting and hearing on stage. And that's what I love, is that whether somebody's looking for a speaker for their business or corporation, whether it's doing the emotional intelligence training and implementing that, whether it's, an event that inspires women, just like we had at the Fearless Women's Summit, whether it's students or schools or colleges or universities or any of those kind of things, that you work with such a diverse audience, and that your message transcends all generations and all kinds of people. That's what I love, that, you work with high-powered professionals and attorneys and corporations and things like that. And you also inspire all kinds of community groups and women's groups and things like that. So we just wanted to make sure that we got the message out as to all the great things that you do, and that how women can, or corporations or businesses or whatever, can go about booking you to be a part of whatever they're doing. Because I just think that, you're just a one-stop shopping when it comes to inspiration and education and everything that goes along with it. So before we wrap up today, is there anything that you want to leave with our viewers today in terms of anything that maybe we didn't cover, or any last thoughts that you want to leave with everyone?
I want to leave you with one story, and it's about my son when he had the brain injury. And this is one of my favorite stories, and it's the basis of much of the work and the start. And it was during his recovery period, and he was still pretty severely brain damaged at that point, and he's in the hospital, and I come in, and he's futzing with this thing on his wrist, and he turns to me and he goes, "Mom, they gave me a watch that does me no good." Now he's pointing to a monitor that would cause alarms to go off if he left the brain injury ward. But to him, it had a band like a watch and a little block on it like a watch. So to somebody who was brain injured, it must have been a watch. But it was a watch that did him no good because he couldn't tell time. And that became a mantra in our family as he was improving and developing, and became something that my husband and I even say to each other, is when there's something that you're spending your energy on that does you no good, it's a watch that does you no good. How do you know? Because it's not solving a problem, it's not bringing you joy, it's not necessary. Cut it out of your life. Just cut it out. And it can be over funny things, even like my husband, he makes the best sandwiches in the world, and he'll make a sandwich, leave it on the table, and I'll go by and I'll take a bite out of it. And as I'm walking away chewing, he'll turn and he goes, "Hey, you took a bite out of my sandwich." And I just turn around and I go, "Well, that's a watch that does you no good," meaning he's not getting the bite back. And if he wants another sandwich, he can always make one. There's no reason for him to fret over the fact that I took a bite out of the sandwich. So that's the one I use on my husband a lot. But the idea that we put things on our plate that does us no good and we leave it there. So your first step in creating that freedom is to start taking some of those small watches that do you no good off of your plate. And when you start doing that, just observe how much more energy and time that you end up with.
I love that. That is the best message I think that you can leave everyone with today, is just that thought as to evaluate the watches in our life that are not doing us any good. That's and right. And focusing on the ones that are doing good in our life. So I want to thank you, Francine, for enlightening us today about all the great things that you do and how you're helping people in this world. And it's just an honor and a pleasure to have you as part of our One Woman Speakers Bureau. We're going to post Francine's links in the comments below. So we'll post her website that if you're interested in learning more about her work, and also the link that if you're interested in booking her to speak at an event, or to come into your business or corporation and learn more about emotional intelligence and the work that she does with that, or any of the great stuff that she does, we'll be happy to help you with that. So I want to thank everybody for watching today, and be sure to keep watching more on One Woman when we interview amazing women from right around the world doing great things right around the world. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.